Alright,
Good
so
afternoon.
right, we are going to start. I mean, there are some other persons who should be in attendance. Not seen them as yet, but we're going to start. They can catch on. Alright, so alright, this session will basically be covering setting up your fiscal or financial year, and in a school setting, the financial year would either be April to March, which would be in line with the government's fiscal year, or the financial year can also be the school year, which is September to August. So it depends on the account. Like for subvention accounts, I know it's normally April to March. And as for the fees accounts, it is normally the other way. It's normally September to August, right? Which would be running with the school year. Alright. However, a QuickBooks company file allows only one financial year per company file. We'll be looking at that. We'll be also looking at setting up a transaction date password. We'll be also be looking at setting up users and role. So a transaction date password has to do with the security of your data, and setting up your users and roles as well as to do with your security or your the level of access your users would have. So it's very important that when you're starting you set up a transaction date password, and you have set up your users and roles as well. We're going to look at creating bank accounts and entering the opening balances, and we're going to be looking at two methods of entering the opening balances for the bank accounts. And I guess the most important part of this session today will focus on, or is the most important part, is creating a budget, because the Ministry of Education requires that a budget be prepared and be submitted for approval. And most school bursars or principals would do this process in Microsoft Excel. So I'm going to be showing you how you can use QuickBooks to create the budget, and also basically how to use it to monitor the budget to see whether or not you are spending more than you have budgeted or less than what you have budgeted. And we're going to look at budget by class or by department. Alright, so let's go. Alright, so the first thing we are going to be looking at is setting up our fiscal year, our financial year. And to do so, you would go to company, and I'm going to turn on Zoom because I know that sometimes the screen can be very tiny. So I'm going to turn the magnifier on. Persons can see the screen better. Alright, so to set up your fiscal year, to create your fiscal year, you would go to company and you would go to my company, and where you have the pencil icon, which is edit, to the top right in the box, you're gonna click on the pencil icon, and here you will see the company information, the company name, basically the information that you have entered when you created the company. Right, so where we need to look now is under report information. Right, so we need to go to report information, and by default QuickBooks sets the fiscal year to January and the tax year to January, and that is so because most companies would use the tax year as their fiscal year, so it's easier for bookkeeping and so on. But in this case it's not so. So what we are going to choose to use the September to August fiscal year, which would be in line with the school fees budget. Tax year remains the same. The tax year would remain the same, and we need to select OK. Once you have done so, you have basically set your fiscal year. So it is that easy to set your fiscal year. And if you don't set your fiscal year, you will not be able to create a budget, because a budget is basically per fiscal year. So you need to establish your fiscal year before you can create a budget. Very important. Alright, so we are now going to move on to setting up a transaction date password. And a transaction date password is basically, as the name suggests, a password that you will need to enter to add or edit a transaction before a particular date. So if I am starting my books the 1st of September, I can set a transaction date password for the say for instance the 31st. Therefore, anything that is being entered before that time will require the password, or anything being edited before that time will need a password. And that is very important where your reporting is concerned, not just when you are starting the setup of QuickBooks, but when you are doing your reporting. Because what I get from a lot of persons using the software in the school system is that they do their recons, print their recons, sign their recons, stamp their recons, and file a hard copy. The next month they go back to do their recon, the opening balance have changed. Right? And this is so because another user may have who have the necessary privileges may have deleted a transaction in error, changed a transaction, and so this has basically thrown the bank recon out, and that would give you that extra work of going back to reconcile the periods that are affected, or you may need to do an adjusting entry if you don't want to do that work, which can be really messy on your books. And to prevent all of that, I'm going to show you how to set a transaction date password to prevent change this to your file once you have reconciled a period. So this can be done from preferences, or you can do it while you are setting up your users. So to do so from the preferences, you would go to accounting, and you have what is called closing date. I know that some software, like for instance Peachtree or Sage 50, allow you to keep 2 years open. So once a year is closed, you once a year is closed out, you basically would not be able to make any edits to that year. So QuickBooks on the other hand allows you to have all the years open. So if we don't restrict them, then it will be just like a open house where persons can go anywhere inside the house. Alright, so let's set the transaction date password, and to do so we will click where you have the closing date box. You would click set date / password, and here we're going to click on the closing date. And the closing date we're going to select is the 31st. And we need to create a password. This password is different from it, can be different from your login password as the administrator. Alright, so you can create a password that is complex, so it's not easily guessed. This is our standard password here that I am using. Right, so password was created and I've just selected OK. So we have set a transaction date password. What we now need to do is to set up users and roles. So we're going to add the different persons who are going to use the system. And even if QuickBooks is on one computer, you can have several users. So not because you may have a single user license or QuickBooks is only installed on one machine, you can still maintain a good level of control with that one computer. So you don't have to have multiple computers to segregate the functions and have different controls. Alright, so to add a user, you would go to company and you would go to set up users and passwords. So you click on set up users. So to set up your transaction date password, you go to edit, preferences and accounting, company preferences. You click on set date / password, and the transaction date password would be the 31st of August. And we have created a very simple password here, simple in length but complex. Right, and just need to select OK, and basically your transaction date password is set. we moved on to setting up users and roles. And to set up a user, I was explaining that not because I know primary schools may have only one user for their QuickBooks, but even though it's one user, they still can maintain a level of control by having different user accounts that access the one QuickBooks company file. Right, so it doesn't have to. The user is not based on the number of computers that the software is installed on, but it can be installed on one system, and you give each user their permissions or their necessary access. Right, so to do so, you go to company and you go to set up users and password. And once you do so, the first thing you need to do is you may need to create an admin password. By default, the admin password is blank. So we can edit admin and create an admin password. Alright, and now we can add other users. So to add a user, you click add user. You can use like first name, first initial, last name, and you can have the users enter their password. Which would be known to them. So that each user should have their own password. So next screen is basically asking us for the access for this user. What kind of access we want this user to have, and we're giving this user selected areas of QuickBooks. We don't want this user to have all access, so we're going to use selected areas of QuickBooks. So click on next. And where sales and accounts receivable is concerned, if this is a payables person, you don't need to give this person access to accounts receivables. If all this person do all day is accounts payables, right? Because you don't want to have the system open like that. The more you open the system, the more errors you are going to have, because persons will have access to more areas in the system to create errors. So we're gonna select no access for that. And this person is a payables person, so you're gonna give this person full access to purchases and accounts payables. And we're not QuickBooks, we're not going to use the credit card section of QuickBooks. But where checking is concerned, as you can see, this area includes common banking activities such as writing and printing checks. So yes, we may need to give this person access, not based on the credit cards, but based on the checking part of it, because this person would need to be posting the checks as a payables person then. So we'll still select full access for this one. Where inventory is concerned, alright, being a payables person, it depends on how the accounts department is set up, because where inventory is concerned, this person would enter purchase orders, receive goods, can adjust the inventory, and it may not be good to have the same person preparing the payment and the same person receiving the goods. It's best to segregate the duties. It may be difficult to do in a small environment with limited staff, but I'm just basically showing you the right thing to do. So in this case, a payables person will be different from a inventory person. So we're going to select no access. Where time tracking is concerned, we're not going to be looking at payroll in this training. So no access, no access, and sensitive accounting activities. When a user has been granted this access, this user would be able to transfer funds between accounts, make general journal entries. So this would be more of a bursar's function or an accountant's function or principal's function. So we would select no access for this one, and financial reporting has to do with the level of reports that the person can see, whether that be a income and expenditure statement, a bank recon report. You can choose no access for this one as well. Alright, we're changing or deleting transactions are concerned. It's very important that this is restricted, because you don't want somebody to do a transaction, then go back and change the transaction without some kind of override or approval by a superior, whether that be a bursar approving a clerk's changing a transaction, or a principal approving a bursar's or secretary's changing a transaction then. So do you want this user to have the ability to change or delete transactions in the areas they have access to? I would say no, so you select no for this. So basically the user would either ask well, tell the superior that, hey, I made an error with this transaction and it should be that amount and I posted it for that amount, and it is changed. I mean, it can be where you have a backlog, it may not work, but if your accounts are up to date and you're using the system on a day-to-day basis to do your transactions, it can just fall a part of your operation where it does not affect your productivity. But it can be very counterproductive. The more controls you put in place on the system, the less productivity you will get. But you still will need to strike a balance between being productive and maintain the highest level of controls in your department. Alright, so we're going to select finish. And that would be it for setting up users and roles. You can go on and add as many users as you want, depending on your needs. We are now going to be looking at creating bank accounts and entering the opening balances using two methods. We are going to create 5 bank accounts, and to create a bank account, can go back to our chart of accounts here and can right click anywhere on a blank area and click on new. Type would be bank. You are going to enter the name of the account. So normally you want to identify the account by the 4 digits, last digits of the account number and the name of the bank, as well as the purpose of the account. So you can say something like NCB fees account number and that would be like the last 4 digits. And I normally sub the accounts under bank and cash, so I can look at bank and cash and see the overall cash balance for the institution. So basically subbing this account as bank and cash. And the first way to enter the opening balance for these accounts is when you are creating the accounts, you enter it here where you have enter opening balance. It is the easier way to do it, but the limitation is you are not able to select a class while you do so. And as I said in the previous session, classes are very important as it relates to reporting, because you may have different entities. Well, not me. Schools would have several entities that they need to report on separately. And the fact that all your bank accounts are in one company file and you may need to report on all of those bank accounts that are linked to the different units. Only way you can get that done in QuickBooks is by class. So every single transaction should be assigned a class. If you use this shortcut method of entering the opening balance, you will not get the opportunity of assigning a class. So we are going to do 2 accounts this way and 3 accounts using the longer way and more technical way. So the ending balance as at the 31st of August. Let's say this ending balance is $5 million. And maybe that's too much of a big amount for that account. I want to use small amounts. Let's use $2.5 million. And this is as at the 31st. Description of the account can be the same as the name. We can select save and new, or we can select save and close. Alright, so the fact that I am entering a transaction on or before the 31st, I need to enter a password. Right, because the period is closed. Because the open period is actually September 1st. Anybody try to enter anything that is going to affect the opening balance, they will need a password. We're going to enter the password. Well, I think my caps lock is on. Right. So the fact that I have the password, I could do that opening balance entry. So there you have it, $2.5 million has been entered as the opening balance for the NCB fees account as at the 31st of August, which would open September 1. So we are going to add another one using the same method, but this will be subvention account. And let's say we open September 1 with $10 million. mean, subvention is an account that pays salaries and so on. So I'm gonna use $10 million. And the date will be the 31st of August, which would mean that we need to enter the transaction date password. Alright, and we have subbed these accounts under bank and cash, so we can get an overall picture of our cash situation. So it's showing bank and cash. Bank and cash is now $12.5 million. It is $10 million for subvention and $2.5 million for fees. Now we're going to add 3 more accounts, and it's the same way we're going to add them, but we're not going to add the balances that way. So we're going to go to new, and we're going to go to bank, and I think we have a NCB tuck shop because we created a class for it. And this is a sub of bank and cash. We're going to select save and new. We're going to do NCB canteen, and this is a sub of bank and cash as well. And finally we have NCB. Can be another bank as well, but we're just using this one bank. I know schools may have accounts at several institutions.
We're only allowed 3 accounts, sir.
Oh, okay. Yes, I know that the ministry had done some restrictions where that is concerned. But you can only use 3 if you want. So if you want, we can use 3 for the purposes of the training to make it more relevant. But I wanted it to show for demonstration purposes. Alright, let's create one more. And because we have 4, but I wanted to show you. Alright, let's just do the journal for the tuck shop then. I think maybe we can still work with the 4, but the ministry, I know that the ministry requires schools close accounts and work with only 3 accounts based on the fact that the banks are charging so much for banking fees and so on. It was costing a lot to maintain the accounts. Alright, so this account, NCB tuck shop here, has a balance of 0, because while we created it, we did not enter the opening balance at that time. But to do so, we'll be required to enter a journal. Alright, so a person who has a staff who have the necessary privileges to do journal entries will be required to key on this transaction. So to do the journal, you would go to company and you go to make general journal entries, and basically this journal is doing what the opening balance entry did when we do it using the QuickBooks interface, where you have enter opening balance entries and put in the date. But this is basically the debit and credit that takes place behind the scene. So 2 accounts are involved in this process. The opening balance equity account, and equity accounts would increase on the credit side. So we are increasing our equity. So let's say the tuck shop has $1 million opening balance. You would need to enter $1 million credit to equity and a debit of $1 million to NCB tuck shop account. And for your memo, you can use a narration entry to record opening balance. And this is where you get the opportunity of putting the class in. So you would select tuck shop as the class. You don't get the opportunity to do so when you use the first method that I show you. So I'm now going to select save and close, and it's the same procedure as it relates to the transaction date password. This is a transaction that is in a closed period, so the transaction date password is necessary. So as soon as you complete your recon at the end of the month, you close it. Right, as soon as you have done your reporting and you don't want anything to be changed, you close it. Alright, so I'm going to enter the password now. Right, and the journal went through. Alright, so that's it for entering the opening balances for the bank accounts. I'm now going to move on to the main event, which is to create the budget as per the Ministry of Education sample budget. Alright, the sample budget, that we don't necessarily have figures in the sample budget. What we have basically is the template, but we are going to use our own figures for the purposes of this training. So to create a budget, let's say we're doing a budget for $20 million. Alright, to create a budget, you would go to company and you would go to planning and budgeting, and you would go to set up budgets. Alright, bear in mind that a budget is a forecast, right, of your financial activity. It's a projection. So therefore, at this time of the year, we are at November 2021. You will not be doing a 2021-2022 budget at this time. What you'll be doing now is a 2022-2023 budget, right? But let's say you did not key on your budget in QuickBooks and you need to key on your 2021-2022 budget so you can get your actual versus budgeted report to get your variances. It would mean that you would need to key on your 2021-2022 budget as well, right? But your budget that you need to prepare for approval would be 2022-2023, which you can use QuickBooks to prepare, export it to Excel, format it, send it to the Ministry of Education. It's in your system. Once the budget is approved, once you start spending, you can monitor it. Next year come, the Ministry of Education said they want to see what you have actual versus your budgeted report. One click of a button and you have that report ready for the ministry. Alright, so we're going to let's do the budget for the next year. Alright, so you have two budgets. You have P&L budget and you have balance sheet budget. P&L is the same as your income and expenditure. Right, but income and expenditure is mostly used in a non-profit sense, seeing that it is the organization is not for profit, and you can't use the word profit or loss. It's either surplus or deficit. So income and expenditure is the word, and QuickBooks does not reflect that, but it means the same thing. So the P&L would be your income and expenditure, and the balance sheet, I know that some government some schools, especially government schools, they don't focus much on balance sheet per se, but you can create a budget for your balance sheet. But we are focusing on the P&L, or the income and expenditure, for this training. Alright, so you're going to click on next. Once you have selected the date or the period, then here you can add additional criteria to the budget. We're going to skip that and we're going to go to next. And what we are doing, there are two ways to create your budget. You can create your budget from scratch. In this case, we do not have an option because we don't have any historical data, so we have to create from scratch, unless you are going to use your manual historical data. But QuickBooks has no historical data to create the budget from. So if the second option will basically create the budget from the previous year's actual data, right? And what will happen is that you can increase those amounts as you see it necessary. So if you add actual data in QuickBooks, you could just basically create from those data and plus it up by a percentage to allow for inflation and so on, or changes in your operation. Like for instance, you have COVID-19 now. For instance, you maybe spending a lot more on cleaning and sanitation and sanitization. So I mean, those things would affect a budget, because maybe the year before you did the budget there was no COVID, and then COVID came, so there would be a change in your operation. So that would also affect your budget. So once we select create a budget from scratch, it will open what looks like a spreadsheet, and here we are going to populate this spreadsheet looking screen, and this is basically your chart of accounts, right? So your chart of account would fall in the same order as the MOE template based on the object coding in terms of the alphanumeric coding. So as you can see, B income, and scroll down, we have all the B's, just that we have not do the necessary sub. We have C1, C1.1, right? So once you populate this, basically you are doing what you would have done in Microsoft Excel, but the data is in a format where it can be more meaningful, where you can analyze the data and so on. So let's say we are doing a $20 million budget, and your budget should balance. Your income has to be equal to your expenditure, because if you are getting a salary of $200,000, your expenditure cannot be $250,000 and your salary is $200,000. So $20 million, we're going to enter the income section. So let's say we get a grant for subvention of 10 million or $12 million. You can choose to enter it on a cash basis, in the sense that you would enter it only in the months where you know you would receive the monies from the government, or you can choose to spread it out more evenly. You can go ahead and enter the $12 million if you get the money in September. Then you enter all the money in one month. Right? But what if it's a case where you get the funds over time, or you want to spread it out so the reports can be more meaningful? So let's say a regular grant, you get $3 million. What we would do, we would enter $3 million here, and we divide that $3 million by 12, and the system can do the maths. System can do the maths. So once you use any of the symbols, would that be divide, multiply, minus, or plus, in any of these QuickBooks fields? Well, in any field in QuickBooks, where you enter figures, you will see those black and white stars appear, which means that it is doing calculation. And you can just select enter, and it will do the calculation for you. So what you need to do now is just click on copy across, and it will populate all your months with $250,000. So maybe maybe it's not good to do your income this way. Maybe it's good to have your income budgeted for in the months that you get them. But it's bad for reporting. It can be bad for reporting because, so for instance, you do a income and expenditure statement for 3 months to take to your board. It will show a big deficit, for instance, if you put all the income in 1 month and no income for those months. But the only thing you may be seeing is expenditure. So it all depends on how you want your reporting to look. Alright, or whether you want to use cash basis reporting or accrual basis reporting. I would accrue the amounts evenly across the months. Alright, so let's say we have Tuck Shop. We're budgeting an income of $2 million from Tuck Shop. You click on copy across. Alright, the 4 cents is a rounding error. We're gonna ignore it. It can be corrected by adjusting one of these. Can maybe change this to 6.3. And let's say we get a maintenance grant, because we're at $17 million. Let's say we get a maintenance grant of $3 million. It'd be about $250,000 per month. Alright, so that would balance to $20 million. Alright, so we need to enter some expenditure. So let's say we have compensation for the staff and the establishment. Let's say our permanent teaching staff cost us $8 million per year. Copy across, and let's say the temporary cost us $4 million. That's how we basically budget for that $12 million. You copy across. That's it, rounding error again. There you have $12 million there. So we need to look at regular grant and the income. We're going to look at the maintenance grant, regular grant, and the tuck shop income, which I guess these can be spent on a number of things. So general class material, let's say this is $2 million. You copy across, and let's say instruction. No, this is part of instruction. And let's say water. No, let's say electricity, I should say, is another $2 million or 1.5 million. Copy across, 1.5 million. I think we have $3.5 million. No, I think we have 12 and 3. I think we have $15.5 million there. We need another $4.5 million to close the budget. Maintenance of grounds. Let's say we have $1 million for that. Copy across and just adjust for the. It's always out by 4 cents. I don't know why. That's the rounding error. Plus or minus 4 cents. And so that's $16.5 million. Let's say professional services. Let's say cleaning materials, $500,000. Copy across, and we're going minus 4 cents. And at professional services, let's say this is 500,000 as well. I think what I just did is to inadvertently save the budget. I'm gonna go back to it. Keep on getting an extra 0. So our budget is now at $17.5 million. Let's.
You could include something at internet, Mr. Jones, since
Internet.
that's really costing us now.
Alright,
Yeah.
let's put internet for $500,000 then. Alright, so 500,000 divided by 12. You copy across. That would screw us off to 18 million flat. And telephone could be another $500,000. I know schools have CUG and so on. Trying to use round figures. So we need $1.5 million. I'm going to use instructional field trip. $1 million. And staff welfare $500,000. I think we need another $1 million. I'm gonna put canteen operational expense $1 million. Alright, and I'm gonna select OK, and basically our budget would be completed. But to look at this, the budget report, you will now go to reports and go to budgets and go to budget overview, and this will basically create a report, and we can now look at the budget on a month-to-month basis, just as how we created it. First I need to check if it is balanced, or I think we are out by, I think I created an extra $1 million, so I have to go back and fix that. Alright, so our expenditure is, we over budgeted by $1 million. We have to go back to our expenditure to change that. So we go back to company and we go back to set up budgets, and I think it's the last $1 million that I put in. This canteen operations, canteen operational expenses. Oh no. Can just put a 0 in it and just select copy across. the report would be changed instantly. Alright, so basically this 0.4 cent is a rounding error, but your budget is basically balanced. It should actually be 0, where your total is 20 million for both. So what we can do now, these columns are displayed by month. So we can choose to display the column by year, which would be more relevant to the situation. So we change it to show year, and this is what you would export to Excel and format it. So once you export this to Excel, you can format it, get rid of the indentation, put it in the format that the Ministry of Education need, and that formatting shouldn't take you 10 minutes to do. So here is the $20 million budget. I mean, there's a 4 cent rounding error somewhere. I mean, I think it's instructional field trip. Yeah, this should actually be $1 million, but I mean, that's the least of our problem right now. So this is what you would export to Excel, as I say, and you can modify it, tweak it, and use it for your send it to the Ministry of Education. Alright, so basically we have come to the end of this session.